I feel like I'm at a place right now where I'm 31 years old, right? And so a lot of my friends who have been in long-term relationships, there are some marriages that are happening. I've personally been with my partner for 7 years. We recently got engaged and we are getting married this year. So there's like that kind of path. And then there are some of my friends who are just starting to break up with their long-term partners who like had these plans and who, you know, were really looking forward to that. And that was their person. And it's just like, it feels very intense when there is this clear line for some people of like, you know, you did this or I feel this way and therefore we're not a right fit anymore. But how do you navigate, or like, how do you recommend couples navigate that gray area where maybe they're like, how do we know if we want to keep investing in each other or not? We don't really talk about this gray area either, I feel.
No. And so that's oftentimes when I see people in my office, right? They've tried it on their own for a while. They might have went to church and got the counseling or whatever religious thing they're into. And then they're realizing like it's not exactly working. Maybe we need a professional. And so what I usually have lovers do is I have them table breaking up and they decide on the time frame. 3 months, 6 months, 2 months, whatever it is. 2 months is not really enough time to do a lot of work, but 3 to 6 months is what I say. I say everybody is dedicated to this relationship for the next 3 to 6 months. Breaking up is not an option. One, to alleviate fear that one person is going to be left. And so sometimes people do really strange things out of fear, right? I'm going to try and do everything I can to keep you. I'm going to try everything I can to have you prove that you care for me. And so that can be a really dangerous area to be in because people can start to feel desperate. So I'm going to alleviate that. I want to get that off the table. The other thing is, what would it be like broken up?
Right.
So no, I don't want to have sex with you and you want to break up with me because I don't want to have sex with you, but I am so turned off. And so those are things that we have to parse out typically in therapy. And it helps when you have a third party because now the other person isn't an enemy, but I get to treat you as a team because my job is your relationship. I got to take care of the relationship between you two and you all have been actively harming it. So how do I help you heal it instead?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I mean, I'm sure you have all the data and all the information on this as a couples therapist, but I feel like for me as like a person whose parents got divorced at a very young age, like obviously what was modeled or not modeled for us does inherently in some capacity impact the way in which that we see our relationships. And I like, how do people like break that cycle if they were kind of not given the proper models for what a healthy relationship looks like?
Oh my gosh. That's one of my favorite questions in assessments. I say, who are your favorite relationship role models? And it is scary. When I tell you, it is scary how many people are like, I didn't have any. I look to The Cosby Show or Family Matters or some other sitcom of a TV family and their relationship. And I'm like, wow, it's sad. There's no one they could look to, and they're really trying to figure it out for themselves. And even with your parents, right? So they divorced very, very early. And sometimes divorce is the answer for folks and for families. And you saw a model of what you didn't want.
Right.
You're like, oh, I don't know if I want this for myself. And so you figured out that piece of it, which is great because you're not starting from scratch. It's not something completely unknown.
True. Yeah. And I'm sure, I don't know if other folks feel this as well, other kids of divorced parents, but I kind of, when I was a kid, made a promise to myself of like, I'm not gonna marry someone unless I've been with them. I chose not that arbitrary, but kind of like 5 years. Like I want to be with someone for at least 5 years before I commit to them, like blah, blah, blah. And no surprise, my partner and I have been together for 7 years. We're getting married like very close to our 8-year anniversary. And I wonder if I just like had that in the back of my head or, you know, like, cause I don't know. I think like marriage is something really interesting that I think like my generation of peers are thinking about more than ever, and we're getting married later than our parents did. But with the stats of like 50% of marriages end in divorce, it's really fascinating to me that we're, as a society, like kind of putting that stat aside and choosing still to go for it and to be in that no one usually, I think, gets married with the aim of getting divorced. I mean, maybe some, but most people don't. And so what do you think about that? About like this kind of big scary stat out there and how we kind of still are romantics? Like, why are we still doing this, basically?
Well, I think we love love, right? I mean, and that's why I do my work. I love love. I love to be able to see that two people at 100% on their best days can come together and make something beautiful. And everybody wants to be wanted. That's another thing. Like, nobody's walking around like, I don't want anybody to want me. Like, no, everybody wants to be wanted. The 50% stat, I'm actually really happy about, because at least in my communities, they'd be like, oh, you know, people don't get married and stay married like your grandma and grandpa. And I'm like, well, grandma couldn't buy a house by herself.
Right.
Like, grandma couldn't have a credit card. Right? Songs like Papa was a Rolling Stone because grandma couldn't leave. That's why.
Right.
She was there with 8 kids.
Dude, for real. My grandma literally had 8 kids. Like, my dad is one of 8.
Right? So the options for folks back then were vastly different than they are now. And so if 50% of marriages are ending, that means 50% of people are finding out that they don't want to be in this relationship for the rest of their lives. They don't have to sacrifice themselves for the rest of their lives.
Right.
So I'm hoping those people can get to some type of happiness. And I love the fact that we're still taking leaps of faith. Leaps of faith that we can be together, that we can make this work. But I tell people every day, you're supposed to feel chosen by your lover every single day. And you're supposed to choose your lover every day. How are you doing that? What does that look like today?
That's special. We have an opportunity every day to show up for our partners and show up for ourselves. And speaking of you saying everyone wants to be wanted, let's transition to how you work with couples to keep things intimate and fun, because in the bedroom specifically, right? Because I feel like when I get questions from listeners around like, you know, how do I like strengthen my relationship? How do I keep things spicy in the bedroom? Like, how do I keep my partner excited, or how do I keep myself excited? And I feel like for those of us who do have a healthy sexual appetite, we desire sex with ourselves and with our partner. When that part is good, the rest can fall into place. And vice versa. Like, when you're feeling good and connected out of the bedroom, then usually intimacy in the bedroom feels that much better. So I'm wondering, like, what are some kind of common tools and practices that you chat with couples about in this arena?
Oh, I love this. So something, and it typically lives on my Instagram. It's called Naked Homework. So I have all of my lovers do some version of naked homework assignments. It involves being naked, and it's homework. So you have to do it at home. Nobody ever gets naked in front of me. But one of my favorite naked homeworks is to have people front, back, however, top or bottoms, you have to be naked in whatever that vicinity is. You will do the whole body eventually, but it is a gratitude body scan. So your lover and you will take turns saying different parts of the body that you're grateful for. So it could be like, I'm so grateful for your eyes because they tell me exactly how much you love me every time I look at you. And then they have to show that body part some physical affection. Whatever it is, it's physical affection, because so often we're only touching for sex, right? We forget that you can just touch for closeness. You can touch just to release good endorphins. You can hug just because it feels comfortable and just because it's pleasure.
All right, let's transition to your book, How to Not Die Alone. So it covers dating A through Z, and helps readers overcome bad dating habits using tools and lessons from behavioral science. And I specifically want to kind of ask you about this quote that I kind of was foreshadowing earlier, which is great relationships are built, not discovered. And as you know, someone in a monogamous relationship for 6.5 years, I really resonate with this. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the way in which people find relationships, stay in relationships, and keep them healthy and alive. And I wonder if you can just tease this out for me a little bit and share more about this philosophy.
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, the book really takes people through different stages of dating. So it starts with, all right, you're single. What's going on for you? And there's a quiz, which people can take on my website, loganury.com/quiz, that helps you understand your dating tendencies and the things that are holding you back. Then it goes through lots of different things like your dating app profile, navigating the first date, getting to the define the relationship moment. Should we move in together? Should we get married? It really has that whole slew of steps. And obviously, like a lot of people are great at the beginning and they go on a lot of first dates, but they're not getting second dates or third dates or getting into relationships. And so how can you really be more consistent and get to where you want to go? In terms of that quote, it's something that I think about a lot because I feel like one of the negative myths that people are really impacted by is this idea of, I'll know it when I see it, or if this is my soulmate, then it will be easy. If you have to put this much work in at the beginning, then it's not the right person. I think there's a lot of stigma around having crucial conversations or things being hard, with the idea there being, if it's easy, then it's right. And so why I wrote that line is that I really want people to feel empowered. Like I can make a great relationship with many people and I can write different love stories with many people. And you don't have to feel like, oh, I haven't found the perfect person yet, and that's why I don't have the perfect relationship. Instead, how can you think I am the one who can build a great relationship? And it's about finding somebody who's also interested in building versus putting all the pressure on the search to find the quote unquote perfect person.
For some reason, when you just said, I can make a great relationship with anybody or lots of people, I feel like I started tearing up. I feel like we don't really get that messaging, like of this idea that like, you're wonderful and you bring so much to the table. And like the work is kind of like the common denominator here of like you being able, and of course, right? Like that does not mean that everybody is right for everybody. I'm sure there are lots of different ways to figure out whether or not someone is going to be deserving of like a second, third date beyond for you, and vice versa, right? It's like, it's not just up to you. Dating is a two-way, and in polyamorous relationships, three-way plus streets, right? It's like, it's very complex. But point being, I think it's a really beautiful sentiment to think about the fact that you have so much to offer, and how can you figure out how to offer that with somebody else, and the fact that it will require hard work throughout your relationship.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think everyone could get along with everyone else, or you certainly would have much easier relationship with certain people. But the main point is I don't believe in soulmates. I don't feel there's one person out there for you. There's a lot of people who you could create a great relationship with. And it's more about shifting your mindset to saying, okay, which one of the many stories that I could write, which one do I want to write? And I'm going to choose the person where we have that experience, and also understanding that hard work is a sign of a good relationship, not a bad one.
Beautiful. Super into it. Yeah. I think like, being with a partner for so long, and like we recently got engaged, and like just this idea that there are kind of like peaks and valleys in relationships, and everything other than your relationship can impact your relationship, your work, your stress, your family, your mental health. And it's so interwoven, and it's so complex. And so I really appreciate this really basically like normalizing the fact that like relationships take really hard work. And if you're told from the beginning that you're not supposed to get in healthy conflict or not supposed to disagree, then you're in a sense like setting yourself up or your relationship up for failure, because every time you do that, you might see it as a failure in and of itself. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see single people make when it comes to dating or trying to find a partner? And in your book, you talk about this concept of the 3 dating tendencies. So I wonder if you can get into that.
Sure. Yeah. The 3 dating tendencies is a framework that I came up with from having coached a lot of people and spoken to a lot of friends and acquaintances about dating. And I found that even though people are unique, they often have similar challenges when it comes to dating. So this framework divides them up by their unrealistic expectations. That's what they all have in common, but different unrealistic expectations. So the first one is the romanticizer. And this is the one who has unrealistic expectations about relationships. And so they think it's all going to be puppies and unicorns and butterflies. And then in the beginning, they're actually very good at getting into relationships. But then once the relationship hits that inevitable rough spot, and this kind of goes back to my previous answer, they feel like, oh, this must be the wrong relationship for me. And so they're very skeptical. And so they often break up with someone instead of working through those hard moments. And then the second type is the maximizer. And this person has unrealistic expectations of their partner. And so they're really into the search. They feel like, I want to research everyone who I can, and I want to go on as many dates as possible. And I wish I could create this person who's the looks of this person and the ambition of that person, the personality of this. And it's like, they really feel like there's a perfect person out there. Yeah. A Frankenstein date, and feel like, oh, I haven't found my perfect person yet. I have to keep looking, as opposed to what we just talked about, finding somebody great and building with them. They feel like, no, I have to do this really intense search to find this so-called perfect person. And then the third type is the hesitator. And this person has unrealistic expectations of themselves. And so this is the person who is saying, I just can't date yet. Things are really busy at work. Let me wait till work calms down. Or I just can't date right now because I want to lose weight. I want to get a better job. I want to clean my apartment. I want to fix my relationship with my mom. Whatever it is for them, it's like, first this needs to happen, then I can date, as opposed to the idea that you'll never be 100% ready for dating. And instead, you can work on those things in parallel with dating. And actually, dating is the only way that you can really figure out, who do I want to be with? And it's the only way that you can get better at dating.
Yeah. Do you feel like for your clients, there is some overlap between, like, for example, like a romanticizer and a maximizer?
Yeah, I definitely see overlap. And when people fill out my quiz online, sometimes they'll get kind of like the maximum amount in both, or a tied score in both of those. And so I definitely see that. It's like they have the maximizer qualities of wanting to do this intense search or looking for the perfect person, but then they're also really influenced by their romanticizer qualities of, and I believe in a soulmate, and I believe in relationships that if they're right, they're easy. So those can absolutely overlap.
Yeah. Another thing that I'm thinking about too, just when it comes to, this is like I don't know, I guess it's separate, but it just made me think about this idea that, like, what about people who, like, maybe are trying their best, but because they inhabit certain identities that are, like, not as quote unquote desirable, or, they're in a minority group. How do we, like, talk about and think about, like, those kind of cultural scripts that we're receiving about, like, who we want to choose as a partner, like who the mainstream quote unquote, like, people we want to match with are, like, things like that?
Yeah, a big part of my book and a big part of my course that I teach really focuses on this idea of, you think you know what you want, but you're wrong, which is, a hot takey way of saying, we often think we have this so-called type, and that type might be who we were attracted to when we were in middle school and high school, and we just keep chasing, the bad boy or the aloof girl or whatever it is. There's also, of course, cultural scripts that determine who we think is attractive or who we think is desirable. And so I really encourage people to take a step back and date like a scientist, which is my way of saying, really run some experiments. So maybe say, I always swipe left on people who are under 5'8". Well, height doesn't really matter. And most men in the United States are under 6 feet anyway. And so really, what are things that you can do to sort of say, I tend to have this behavior. I'm going to do something differently this time. Maybe I'll like the results, maybe I won't, but at least I will have exposed myself to something different, as opposed to someone who just keeps doing the same thing over and over again and expects to get different results. And so I really encourage people to look at who their so-called type is, try to go against type, and they so often are really pleased with the results.
I'm into that. That's really, that's amazing. Yeah, the height thing is really interesting. I feel like there is a lot of conversation around height. And I think that it's dumb, frankly. I don't really understand. I think like there are a lot of things tied to that of like, oh, well, if you're like a woman, you're like, oh, I don't want to like be taller than my guy in heels or whatever it is. And it's like that really, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't matter. Or like to me, at least, I know for some people it does, but just I feel like we need to look beyond these like because physicality, right? Like it's more about who the person is. And sure, if you want to be attracted to them or you want there to be like romance or sexuality or, whatever, those things are important. But as we get older, if your goal is to have a life partner who you can depend on and make a life with, and if you want a family, like their height being like 2 inches shorter than who you anticipated, being with is a very minimal trait.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in terms of things that I push people on, some of the main ones are age and height. I think people have a lot of preconceived notions around, oh, well, if I date someone of this age, then they're going to want to get married really quickly and have kids, and then they'll rush me. So I need to date someone younger, or this person's too young, they'll be immature. And so there's a lot of misconceptions around age. And then, of course, I think with height, people set these filters and they're literally not seeing these people show up in their apps. Whereas if they met that person at a friend's house or at a bar, they would meet them for their personality, their charisma, how much chemistry they had together, all of those things. And so really just, I encourage people to not turn off the filters altogether, but to really broaden them and see if somebody might show up in your app who you wouldn't have seen otherwise, but you might really get along with.